Hi, everybody. Welcome to our newly renamed fantasy racing feature every week. This is now called Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Racing Pitstop, because Dan is the fantasy racing guru, as everybody knows, for NASCAR.com, NASCAR's games, Yahoo's games, all those games out there, and he's the guy. He's the man. Welcome, Dan the man.
Thank you very much. Stick
Uh,
around long enough, people remember your name.
Either become famous or infamous, right?
Yeah.
Or legendary. Hopefully, you get enjoy the famous before you become legendary. So anyway, we don't want to waste a lot of time with a lot of nonsense. We're going to Pocono this week for the first of two at Pocono Raceway, flat track. We'll start this off talking about salary cap games this week. What are the particular things you look for a salary cap type of situation going to Pocono? I would think the fact that maybe the second race is easy, a little easier to pick during the year. Is the first one a little tougher?
Yeah, but we have had three flat tracks so far. We've had Phoenix, Michigan, I'm sorry, Phoenix, Martinsville, and Richmond. So it's not quite the same. The 2.5 miles makes it quite a bit different, but flat track skills somewhat carry from one track to the next. Then pretty soon we've got Indianapolis coming up, Pocono's second race, New Hampshire on the heels of that. So we're about to hit a flat track period where this race is going to be more. You're right in one aspect. It's going to be more predictive for the second Pocono race, but it also sets the tone for this summer series, where we have Indianapolis and we have New Hampshire, and then Pocono's second race. So whether or not you get this race right, this is a race that you want to study so that you get the next races correct.
Yeah, we talked about the phenomena of momentum a little bit on last week's fantasy racing show, and I would think that we have had some flat tracks we've run at, but they've been far enough back to where you may not have any momentum carried over from those types of tracks. You're just looking now at more general momentum from recent success overall on the series, right? So I would say Jimmy Johnson's a guy with obvious momentum at the moment.
Yes, and he's coming to track. Hendrick has always been extremely strong here, dating back to the Tim Richmond, Jeff Bodine, Terry Labonte days. They've won with a wide variety of drivers. They've dominated with drivers like Jeff Gordon, who has the most wins at Pocono. And then just everybody tends to run well here. Even Casey Kane, who is batting about 500 in regard to strong finishes. He's had two extremely strong finishes based on the Hendrick Motorsports success. And the other races, some of it's been bad luck, some of it's been you can't be good every week. But Hendrick's is going to dominate the front of the pack again this week. Pocono, the flat tracks, the momentum from the flat tracks will be important for drivers like Kyle Larson, Austin Dillon, the other rookies who we don't have a lot of data for. It's going to be important for Danica Patrick in a converse way. She hasn't done particularly well on the flat tracks this year, so even though she's had some good runs on the similarly configured mile-and-a-half track, Kansas and Charlotte, she's not going to carry that momentum forward because she's had struggles on the flat tracks. So you got to balance it. You've got to know, kind of figure out which drivers their current momentum is going to be important and which drivers the flat track momentum is going to be important. This also brings us to a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Tony Stewart traditionally runs well during the summer. But does he run well during the summer because he runs well on the flat tracks, and there are so many of them here? It's because he runs well at Michigan, and those two tracks are backed up with each other. And the road courses all come in this period that we think of as the summer season, the summer series. So he's either good because he's good on those tracks, or he's good on those tracks because he's good during the summer. And someone else can argue which it is, if the chicken or the egg came first. All you need to know is that someone like Tony Stewart does run well at this time of the year and on these tracks.
And it might be the best case for making the case for the existence of momentum too. If that's the case, if this is if Tony Stewart does well in the summer because he's on predominantly flat tracks and road courses, he still does well late in the season, typically after the summer when you're going back to, the cookie cutter type racetracks. So maybe his momentum from mid-season flat track success is what carries him into the other tracks where he doesn't do as well in the spring and early summer months.
Sure, and it's one argument for NASCAR keeping the schedule pretty much the way it is every year. You learn some predictability because of that. If they really want to shake things up and test some of those other things that they don't care about whether or not a driver has momentum, they're looking for the way it best fits on schedule for the tracks and the people. But it'd be kind of nice if from time to time the middle of the schedule gets shaken up. It'd be extremely nice if the chase got shaken up and there were 10 different tracks in the chase every year. I know the practicality of why that doesn't happen. People plan their vacations a year in advance, 2 years in advance. The tracks aren't particularly fond of the idea of having their races spread all over the year. But it would be nice to see that dynamic get switched from time to time.
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do something where you changed up three of the chase races a year or something like that. Put those into some type of rotation. So you got some other tracks and other track types into the chase, but we're probably never going to see that.
No, and my proposal has been that I don't think any tracks deserve 2 races. Daytona, Charlotte, even Bristol, they don't deserve 2 races. What it would be nice was to see the regular season be all one race, each one race per track, and then any track that's going to have 2 races, put that in the chase. And then NASCAR can craft which tracks should have that second race, craft the playoffs so that it actually is a representative playoff. Stick a road course race in there. Much as I hate them, keep a restrictor plate super speedway in there. But then just move that stuff around so that some tracks get second dates. You wouldn't probably give Watkins Glen or Sonoma a second date, but you could come down to the Circuit of the Americas, Road America. There are a number of great road courses that they could stick a third race and get a race into the chase.
Absolutely, I love it. I mean, that'd be a really interesting thing to see them try, which again I doubt. But so
you never know, though. I mean, they do smart things and they do things that most of the media kind of thinks of as dumb. I don't know, floating the idea.
There's no shortage of that stuff for sure.
Floating the idea of cutting back on the horsepower. Why would you want to do that when you're having such a great season? But this win and end scenario that they put up, they didn't know exactly how it was going to turn out. And it's turned out that we've got more winners at this stage of the season than we've seen in a long time. So that one worked. Yeah. They're trying things. Where major sports go, they try things a lot more frequently than the stick and ball sports, I believe. So you got to give them kudos for that.
Yeah, and frankly, it seems like a majority of the time things work out for NASCAR, at least the way they would want them to work out, you would think. So, all right, well, we should talk about salary cap picks. Who would you be picking? What would your strategy be going into Pocono this week, knowing there's another one 5 weeks down the road?
Well, for Pocono, it's kind of a nice mix of dark horses and marquee drivers. You get somebody every now and then that sneaks in there, does great their first couple of times. We've had Denny Hamlin, who won both races in his rookie season. I believe he won them both from the pole. You've got a number of other drivers. If you read the Yahoo preview this week, they're listed in there that scored top tens in their first race. So it's not unheard of for a dark horse to shine at Pocono. Then you've got the Hendrick dominance, which is kind of locked up the front of the pack. So there aren't as many other owners in the top 5, top 10 as we see on some other tracks. But you've also got a nice balance of marquee names that make their way to the top of the board there too. Kurt Busch in the lightly funded number 78 last year swept the top 10 here. Tony Stewart swept the top 10 here. Not that he's lightly funded, but certainly doesn't have pockets I wouldn't think of a Hendrick Motorsports. And he's got 4 top 10s. Pocono is also, you can look back and identify those dark horses / marquee drivers by the number of sweeps that they had last year. Last year, there were 10 drivers that swept the top 15 in Pocono's 2 races. 7 drivers swept the top 10. 7 top 10s is the most of any track that hosted 2 races last year. 10 top 15s is the 3rd most behind Texas and New Hampshire, another flat track. So you're looking at drivers' records carrying it forward. We've got Tony Stewart going in with those 4-race top 10 streak. We've got Ryan Newman coming in with a 3-race top 10 streak, 1 race off, 2 top 10s before that. Dale Earnhardt Jr. swept the top 5 last year, missed in one of the previous 4 races, but had a 3-race top 10 streak there. So that momentum carries over from year to year. Last year's Pocono is going to be extremely predictive of how a driver runs this year, or this week.
Even though the cars have changed as much as they seem to have changed?
I think so. I think it's going to be less apparent on the flat tracks where it's more of a mechanical grip that they need to get through the corners. There's plenty of room to get away from the other drivers, especially down that long front stretch, so that you can affect a pass at the end of it. So you don't. I don't think they get quite as aero sensitive here as they do on others. And some of what we thought might be making a difficult pass could have been that some drivers that we expected to dominate weren't dominating. Now that Jimmy Johnson is all's right with the universe and he's back in the front of the field, it doesn't look that much different this year than it did last year. As much different as it did. And one reason we thought there was such a big difference in the new car is because drivers like Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth were struggling somewhat. I'm not sure if that's what we're seeing or if it's the impact of NASCAR's win and end policy. More drivers taking risks to get there in the top 10 and seeing different people up front was because of that dynamic rather than the fact that the cars were so radically different.
Well, if it's because of the latter, then that definitely means that NASCAR got it right when they made this rule change, because racing for the win, racing to be up front is what makes it exciting, rather than racing for top 15 points.
Yeah, it makes my job a little more difficult because
I'm sure.
Like Jeff Gordon, I don't know what in the world happened to him on that last pit stop or that next to the last pit stop. Dominated all day. They get one change wrong and he drops like a stone, partly because of his difficulties restarting and partly because of the handle just going away. He was going to lose 1 or 2 positions. You didn't think he'd fall all the way back to 15th after running as strong as he did.
No, that was surprising because he had run well all day and had been running well for the first part of the season so far.
Second best average running position last week and finished 15th.
One little bit of news before we segue over to the Yahoo game. A couple of teams were testing at New Hampshire today, I believe. I know that Ganassi Racing was there, and I think it was Hendrick and Ganassi. Does that give those teams any advantage at Pocono since New Hampshire is a flat track? Assuming they were tire testing over there.
Oh, probably can hurt. The more laps you get on that style track, the better. So
one of the drivers who definitely was involved in the test was Kyle Larson. So that might, go to your dark horse pick at Pocono.
Could be. So far, neither of the rookies have done particularly well on flat tracks, but Pocono has a way of rewarding smart drivers, and I think Larson is certainly one of those smart drivers, as a smart crew chief. If they get the calls right in that final quarter of the race, the last 100 miles, he could threaten to win. Carl Edwards, I think, won his first race. Denny Hamlin won his first race there. So
Logano too. Didn't Joey Logano win there? Kind of on a fluky win, but I think it was there.
He did, but it wasn't in his first start. And actually, it wasn't.
No, not his first start, but it was his first win. I think was at Pocono, right?
First win was at New Hampshire, and that was rain under rain conditions. They
Okay.
stayed out. I think his second win was at Pocono, and that was a relatively short run to the checkers when he bumped Mark Martin out of the way. The guy
That's right.
who
Yeah, that's right.
the guy who said, this is the guy, this is sliced bread, gave him the sliced bread. No respect.
Oh, well, okay. That's what I get
But
for trusting my memory.
Edwards and Hamlin both won in their first attempt at Pocono. So the point is that rookies can do well here.
Yeah, and Hamlin has kept his mojo at Pocono too. He's been really good there, as he has been at Martinsville and Richmond and other flat tracks. So
Yeah, he's definitely a flat track master. His last two spring races or summer or whatever, weird time of the year, I never know what to call this race. I usually stick with spring and fall just so you know it's the first and second race of the year.
mhm.
But Hamlin's last two spring races have been a fifth and an eighth. His last two fall races, August, 29th and 43rd. So he struggled here a little bit too. The 43rd was mechanically induced, I believe, or an accident, something. He certainly didn't just finish back there. But you just never know.
Yeah. All right. So going to a Yahoo game. What's your roster look like this week with A, B, and C drivers? And what's important here? I mean, you talk about allocation management a lot, and we're about almost probably a third of the way through the season now.
About a third, halfway through the regular season plus 10, so a little bit beyond the third mark. Yeah, and you get to use drivers 9 times in Yahoo. If you've been playing it right, you should have at least 6 starts remaining for everybody else, and spread them out over the rest the end of the year. That's how I've always played, and I get a lot of pushback from players, Yahoo players. Points are points. Doesn't matter when you earn them. If Johnson's on a roll, use him when he's on a roll. And there's some validity to that. You need to decide which tracks you're going to showcase drivers on. For Denny Hamlin, all year long, I've been saying you're saving him for the flat tracks. So when you get to a track that he's like Darlington, where he has been strong, but it's not a flat track, you still may not want to start him because it may not be one of his 9 best races. And since he struggled as much as he has at the beginning of the year, now anytime that he's running well, start him. I think his top 5 or top 10 last week certainly puts him on the. He found his mojo at the right time. Running well last week is only going to make him more of a favorite this week in Group B. So I think it's time to look at Hamlin on the flat tracks again, where he's going to be strong. I suspect if he's going to turn his season around, he's going to turn his season around on tracks where he's dominated in the past. Pocono is certainly one of those. One thing that I suggest this week in the Yahoo preview, and if you're not reading it, you should. It's big. Some 21 pages, a lot of charts, a lot of numbers in there.
Unbelievably good stuff.
So even if you don't agree with all my picks, I think you get some pretty good numbers out of there. But one of the things I suggested is down in Group B, you definitely want to go with that balance of marquee drivers and dark horses. There are some good dark horses here. Kurt Busch could be a good dark horse. But if you got burned by Brian Vickers' blown engine at Dover, you probably can't do that. So you're going to want to stick with your marquee drivers, the drivers that have long streaks here. Kevin Harvick is a good pick this week. Ran extremely strong on the flat track so far this year. Had that victory at Phoenix, and 7th at Martinsville and 11th at Richmond. He's been running. This is one of those tracks where it hasn't been all or nothing, track types where it hasn't been all or nothing for him. But he's still capable of running in the front of the field. Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, because of the Hendrick tie-in. I think those are your most logical drivers in Group A. But as I pointed out, Kurt Busch had a couple of top 10s last year for an underfunded team. Obviously, he knows how to navigate this track. If you put him on your roster, make sure you're comfortable with your other Group A driver. And if he practices well, qualifies well, and you're feeling lucky, roll the dice on him. Doesn't mean he can't wreck. Doesn't mean he can't blow up the pit stop doesn't mean the pit crew won't screw something up at the last chance, which is last pit stop, which has been the problem at Stewart-Haas off and on all year. But if you're feeling lucky, he's a good driver, and no one is going to have him. So he makes a good differentiator.
Good strategy move.
Yeah, a driver to avoid this week, though, would be Matt Kenseth, even though he's run well over the last couple of years, or last couple of weeks. Hasn't had a particularly strong record at Pocono. So in Group A, I've got him stuck down in the bottom. Moving to Group B, you've got the drivers that you expect to see there: Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Newman always does well on flat tracks, or often does well on flat tracks. So he's going to be one of those top drivers. Carl Edwards is going to be one of the top drivers. Don't think of Roush Fenway when you come to flat tracks, but that's changing. Edwards has get the numbers in front of me. Swept the top 15 this season. 8th, 13th, and 9th at Phoenix, Martinsville, and Richmond, respectively. So you can expect another strong top 10 to 12 place finish from him. Makes him a good pick in Group B. Move down to Group C. Since there's no one new coming in this week, you're stuck with deciding whether or not you want to start Larson or Dillon. One of those drivers is going to score major points. But Allgaier has done well enough on flat tracks, or well enough in the last little bit, that the difference between how he finishes and how they finish might not be all that great. His last 2 flat track races, Martinsville, Richmond, 23rd and 21st. It's time to stop thinking of him, stop wondering when he's going to get that first top 15, that first top 10, and just start thinking about whether or not he's going to get back to the basics and score a solid top 20. If he does, the difference between him and Larson/Dillon is not going to be as much this week as it is on some other tracks, and he's worth starting because of the allocation management.
I don't have the roster listing in front of me, so is David Gilliland a C driver? I would think he would be.
He is, but the 30, Gilliland, he's a B driver. He got elevated just because we needed so many drivers in Group B. So neither David Reagan nor David Gilliland really should have gotten elevated to Group B, but they did.
Shoot, that was going to be my dark horse call out of the week, because Gilliland has been pretty good at tracks like this, Indianapolis also, and has a road race background. I thought he might be a good, if you wanted to save those Larson and Dillon picks, that Gilliland would have been a good choice here. But if he's in Group B, I don't think that's such a good choice.
Well, I think you may just be a week early. Next week at Sonoma, he might actually be one of the top 4 or 5 points earners. So in that case, you've got to worry about allocation management there as well. You're going to exhaust Logano. You're going to exhaust Keselowski before the end of the year. So David Gilliland at Sonoma more than Watkins Glen might not be a bad pick. Then you got
that's kind of a home track for him out there too. I like David out there.
Those
teams, and I don't know if it has to do with funding or not. Probably does, but that team, just Front Row Motorsports, never seems to get lucky when they take a car out. They're usually taking out all 3 of their cars in the same wreck.
Yeah,
that happens too often.
Yeah, it hurts. And then you've got the restrictor plate, Coke Zero 400 coming up pretty soon, relatively soon.
Yeah, so, he'll be good there too. He and Reagan both probably.
Yeah, more so Talladega than Daytona, but you're going to roll the dice there anyway. So there's some opportunities to take him before the season's up. You also kind of want to look forward to like next week with Jeff Burton in the number 66, and know that this is a good week to go ahead and start someone like Larson or Dillon back to the C drivers, because you are going to get a little relief next week. You're going to get a quality driver in a car that's better than C quality when it's Michael Waltrip coming out of the Michael Waltrip shops. So there's a good pick there.
There's a good advanced tip for when you're planning out your week ahead of time, which I never do. All right. Anything else we got to cover this week for Pocono before we sign out of the?
Well, when we talk about momentum in the summer, there's a reason for that. Pocono's 2 races are the closest on the schedule of any other races. That's a well-known fact. I think only 6 races separate them. Michigan, though, only 7 races separate them from the time they roll out of Michigan to the time they roll back to Michigan. And you've got the 2 road courses in the same 10-race span from Pocono through, I think, Watkins Glen is the 10-race span. You've got the 2 road courses at Sonoma and Watkins Glen that are separated by only 5 courses. So between Pocono, Michigan, and the road courses, you have 3 tracks hosting 2 races with no more than 7 races in between either of their 2 events. That's one reason that you can get momentum during the summer.
Okay, so we'll be watching that over the next several races to see who has that momentum from these early first trips to those types of tracks. Okay, he's Dan Beaver. He is the fantasy racing guru that writes that Yahoo preview at yahoo.com. Make sure you get over there and read that. It's terrific, great information. Whether you play fantasy games or not, you just want to learn about what's going on in NASCAR. That's in the Sprint Cup Series. That is I think the #1 source. We're going to do this every week. We'll be back next week to talk about Michigan, and stay tuned. You can follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race. If you're a fantasy player, you're probably already doing that, but if not, make sure you do. You can follow me on Twitter at OnPitRow. So, again, I'm Charlie Turner. He's Dan Beaver. Dan, we'll talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it.
All right, man.